Forbes India presents India's Growth Drivers in partnership with Barclays Private Clients.
Hello and welcome to Forbes India presents India Growth Drivers in partnership with Barclays Private Clients. I'm your host, Paramita Chatterjee. In this part of the series, we'll be talking today and focusing on manufacturing the future and focusing on the next era of growth and innovation. Because indeed, if you consider manufacturing at its core, it's really all about innovation. And it is a critical part of the economy since it creates jobs and at the same time, it can also generate opportunities and growth for the economy. Indeed, if you take a look at the contribution of the manufacturing sector here in our own country, it contributes to about 16 to 17% of our GDP, with the target being of it contributing at least 25%. That's a target set by the Government of India by the year 2025. And manufacturing at this point in time is on the cusp of a revolution, almost akin to industrial revolution, with the advent of technology, which is creating manifold changes, and also at the same time, it could be said that manufacturing is facing some of its biggest challenges in the face of geopolitical tensions and uncertainties, which have created tremendous supply chain disruptions as well. But challenges are always a fertile ground for innovation. So we are here to speak with industry stalwarts to understand from them the opportunities as well as the challenges that present itself in the manufacturing space. And we are joined today on the series with some of the tallest names coming in from the sector. Let me introduce them to you. We have with us on the show Shriram Natarajan, Director at Molbio Diagnostics. Yogesh Mahansaria, who is the founder and CEO at Mahansaria Tyres. Vishal Goenka, Director at Artek Surfin Chemicals. Kartikey Hariyani, MD at TecSo Energy and Charge+Zone. And Adrish Ghosh, Managing Director, Barclays Private Clients, India. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being a part of this show. So let me start with somebody who's really seen the entire landscape of the manufacturing sector change and undergo tremendous evolution as well. And let me start with Yogesh Mahansaria. And Yogesh, I mean, yours was really at the forefront of the automobile space. You sold your former company to one of the largest known multinationals in the space and started your own company thereafter. Now, when we talk about the challenges and opportunities for the manufacturing sector, particularly from the auto space, you began your company in 2019 after selling off your earlier one, which is the Alliance Tyre Group. Now, what would you say are currently the opportunities that lie in the manufacturing space, particularly post the pandemic, particularly post what's happening right now with Russia, with China, and where India stands?
So, Paramita, I see there are two key opportunities for manufacturing in India. One is a large and very vibrant domestic economy. You know, India is today one of the fastest growing economies in the world. We withstood all the COVID disruption very well, and you know, a lot of the West has seen economic slowdown out of inflation. I think we managed all of those headwinds very well. So I think we have a young and dynamic and growing domestic market, which creates a lot of opportunities for manufacturing companies. And on the other hand, we have this whole global opportunity that is become much more real with COVID, where suddenly companies all across the world have said, hey, we can't depend only on one country for our supply. We need to diversify our supply chain. And then India suddenly become a very, very attractive candidate for that. So I think really, if you look at the combination of these two opportunities together, you know, I've been doing manufacturing in India now for 30 years. I've never seen, you know, both these opportunities fire in sync, and that is what is creating a lot of the excitement about the trajectory of the manufacturing sector.
And that's very well put. You're talking about the domestic opportunities and of course the global opportunities. Let me turn to somebody who's really in that sense a newbie in the space, and that's your company, Kartikey. which is also, really sitting at the cusp of a huge opportunity in the automobile space, which is the whole EV space. Now, when you look at some of the legacy problems which have been there in manufacturing, and it is said now the global trends are towards using technology. As somebody who is really sitting in a new age sector, what are your key priority areas? What are those key investments that you are looking at from your company's perspective?
Yeah, if we really see automobile space, it has been, is undergoing two mega changes. One is the electrification, that is electric vehicles spreading the wings across all forms of automobiles, two-wheelers, three-wheelers and four-wheelers as well. Plus, inwardly looking, there is a mega change happening, what we call as Industry 5.0 or the IoT of everything. Yeah? In other words, every device, every equipment is now connected to the cloud. It's not just the computers or servers, but even a pump or a motor in an industry also can be connected to the cloud, and you can actually monitor the energy consumption, the performance of that particular equipment. Now, in our space, since we started 5 years ago into developing EV charging infrastructure, and one major change, rather let's say progress that we have seen is the localization of or the indigenization of various components that builds the ecosystem. For example, EV chargers, which is one of the critical component of electrification.
Because these are things we used to import earlier, right?
This all was getting imported earlier, and at the same time, other elements of the automobile ecosystem are also getting localized. For example, the push for localizing battery manufacturing, for example, yeah. And it is not just about lithium-ion imports; it's also about how you manufacture these batteries with the battery packs, battery management system, the software that is integrated into it, and so on. So having said that, there is a value chain, the entire supply chain, which is translated to value chain, yeah, which is now getting localized, which is really good for the domestic market and for the economy of India. Because if you really see, automobile contribute roughly 7% of India's GDP. It's a roughly $250 billion industry already in India, and the way the electrification will bring in the change, I think it's scary. Because maybe as an industry or as an industry player, maybe I am not prepared yet, or I need to be prepared for the same, as well as the energy transition which is causing this electrification.
So would you say, Kartikey, it's change or perish at a time like this, at least?
It's a change or perish. It's not about survival, it's about change or
perish.
There,
Very interesting, but you also mentioned about the localization of the supply chain. And let me turn to somebody who's really been at the forefront in the healthcare space. And Shriram Natarajan, you've been talking about, decentralized manufacturing. And that's a big theme which is picking up. But yours is a company which was already doing that for some time. Tell me, how did you approach it as somebody who's really been ahead of the game, so to speak, when it came to diagnostic healthcare?
Yeah, see, I've been in this industry for about 35 years now, and all the time the focus has been on centralized testing in the healthcare space, especially in diagnostics. And everything was centralized, so people have to travel long distances to come to a central location to get treated or get the benefit of healthcare, which left almost 80% of the population out of the purview, because they just couldn't afford to spend so much of money to travel to come seek healthcare for normal ailments. So that's what we are trying to change. We realize that that's the market which needs to be addressed immediately.
So you're offering decentralized care with the help of decentralized manufacturing at the back end as well, because your machines are available at the point of care.
Yes, exactly. So now we are going to the point of care, as you called it right now, and which means that now you can do all these healthcare initiatives right next to the patient. The patient doesn't have to travel. The healthcare goes to the patient so that they get diagnosed early, they get treated early and appropriately, which is more important. Because appropriate treatment is the most important thing. Otherwise,
and would you agree with what Kartikey said, that localization of the supply chain? Have you been able to achieve that?
Yes, that's been the key to what we've been doing. So today, in our case, for example, RT-PCR, as you know, is one of the major technology that we use. About 80 to 90% was imported. Today, in our case, we can say that it's now only about 10%. So it's completely localized. So that's the backward integration that we've been doing. And we've been able to come out with a disruptive technology. So it's just not a Me Too product where we are trying to break down. We're completely disrupting this entire thing from a centralized model to decentralized, point of care.
So 90% of your supply chain is actually localized. The whole Atmanirbhar sort of, we are, producing it all ourselves. Now, let me turn to somebody who's actually got plants present all across the world, and that's Vishal Goenka of Artek Surfin. Vishal, you're hearing these conversations about, localization, about really India being at that cusp. And this was seen to be a golden opportunity. It still is, of the whole China plus one and India really being the sweet spot for manufacturing. What do you think we are getting right, especially from the space that you're operating in? And what do you think we still need to do in terms of the future?
What we are getting right is a wind, a massive tailwind. All along, people said India's opportunity, population, every aspect was in favor of India, but we never got it right. Why now? All along people wanted was China plus one. The global industry was all about China plus one. So if China was at an index of 100 in the cost perspective, now you're comparing basis on 100. Okay, I can give you 1% more, I can give you something more. And we could never get there. That has changed, where the strategy comes up is called China minus strategy. I do not want China in my supply chain, or I want something more but China, irrespectively.
So how is that translated for you as a company?
Recently, under the PLI scheme, also we've in the technical textile, we are putting up the largest recipient of the largest PLI, putting up glass fiber plant in Goa. India currently imports 60% of its glass fiber, which is such a basic commodity. In this room, you would at least have 5 things made out of glass fiber. Having said that, next year onwards, after the plant is commissioned, we would be probably sufficing to 80-85% of the country needs. So this PLI scheme itself is a very, very forward thinking, the way the scheme has been put forward. We spoke about Atmanirbhar, we spoke about made in India, make in India, but now this is actually like putting boots on the ground. And things are starting to flow. Okay. Opportunity always existed, but I think it's now being grabbed by the businessmen, and the government is facilitating that.
Fabulous. Usually it's all about, business and government being at loggerheads, even as the cry continues.
This is happening now.
It's all about encouraging private investment, isn't it, Adrish? Because while, if you see the PMI index, that continues to show a great amount of resilience and possibly buffeted by our domestic, strong consumption story as well. But at the same time, private investment, are we really at that stage of the capex cycle where companies have the courage, the confidence to really put their extra dollars or rupees into the kind of futuristic manufacturing processes and sustainable processes that are required?
Yeah, I would answer it in 2 parts. One is, of course, you would see the trend in terms of credit offtake and also the capacity. So those trends are showing that yes, there is a significant offtake, and that all of that is going towards a lot of that is going towards the manufacturing space. Secondly, because of the disruption on logistics, all of that, there's a lot of investment into going digital, and so those are also requiring a lot of investment, and we're seeing a lot of the credit offtake, not just through banks but also through credit funds going into those areas, and we've seen consistently about 15 to 20% kind of growth in the credit offtake from banks.
Right. So there's clearly an increased confidence. But Yogesh, if I may come back to you as somebody who's been watching this space, there's always been a bit of India has been always a bit of a laggard when it came to this perception of quality, as opposed to, say, the rest of the world, and that includes China as well. That's possibly, there was always this impression. How would you sort of comment on this whole aspect of efficiency of our manufacturing means and quality as well, given some of the new age tools which are available? Are companies such as yourself really focusing on those aspects and seeing those gains?
So I think, the whole perception that India can't do quality, I think is outdated, quite frankly. I think, maybe what was true 25, 30 years ago clearly is not true today. I think India as a quality supplier is well recognized around the world. If I talk about our specific products of off-road tires, an Indian off-road tire does command a price premium of 10-15% over a Chinese off-road tire, because the quality perception has really got reinforced over the years. So I would say that this whole sort of perception that India cannot do quality is frankly outdated, and we have to be more confident about ourselves as a country and as manufacturers. I think Indian quality is today in many products recognized as world class, competing head to head with the best in the industry. I think Indian manufacturers, the more progressive manufacturers, have definitely been investing in technology to improve their manufacturing efficiencies, and using the latest digital tools available. But it's always a journey. You can't go from somewhere middle of the tech stack to top in one day. But when I talk to colleagues across manufacturing, I clearly see digitalization, enhancing technologies, automation, all of these are top of mind for all manufacturers, including for us. Right. I think when it comes to efficiency, I think that we are progressing. We may not be world class there, but I think there's certainly every company is working towards enhancing their efficiencies. I think efficiency as a country, I think we have really progressed. When I look at when we first started exporting 30 years ago, what was the state of infrastructure, logistics, etc., to where we are today, I think we've come a long way.
Because ours is a labor intensive, it has always been. And then we bring in Vishal here, because ours has always been very labor intensive, and we still have a lot of cheap, abundant, available labor, cheap relative to what's available elsewhere, right? Does that model need to be relooked? Because after all, we do have a lot of, good people, workers on hand available. When you have all this technology, which is also there to increase efficiency, I mean, how do you sort of marry the two?
So as efficiency of the people in India, we do have a challenge to be able, very poor quality to be employable. But yes, most of the companies are putting up their own training facilities, training centers.
Is that how you have addressed it?
That's how we are addressing, and I know a lot of other people in the electronics industry are setting up their own training facilities and centers to be able to absorb those people. Otherwise, as schools, and I think the government has also recognized that, and that's why you have the huge number of schools, private universities that are being licensed out. You see the Skill India movement, for the training centers you start, you're being given a lot of SOPs by the government. So I think that's very clearly recognized that we need an overhaul of our education system to have the youth today being employable.
Right.
That's one challenge we have. The second challenge I think we are facing is we became a service economy before we became a manufacturing economy. That service economy created a lot of inflation in India in the 2000s. There was not enough to be able to supply to them, and you saw the inflation which is massively risen up to about 10% in the 2000s.
So you're saying you as a company have really tried to, skill and produce that kind of skilled labor that is required. Sriram, for instance, for your company, and you are now looking at, you have many global markets that you're also addressing, but your manufacturing hub is primarily India, or you're decentralizing it as well?
As of now, it's India.
How are you balancing this whole demand of labor and technology?
So as of now, the manufacturing is in India. But as we go along, as I said, this decentralization also applies globally. And so there will be a requirement to see how we can also have some global operations, because every country is now seeking to have their own manufacturing capability. Even Africa is talking about capacity building, regional capacity building.
So are you going to invest more towards people skills or more into new technologies which makes your production sort of pipeline people agnostic, so to speak?
No, we're investing in a lot of things. First of all, innovation itself, right? So innovation is, I think, according to me, the major driver to make you much more ahead of the curve. and be sustainable globally.
Give us an example of an innovation that you have deployed in the manufacturing
So
space.
today we have an innovation which is a disruptive innovation in the molecular diagnostics space. So today TrueNat, which is our platform, is the only platform in the world which can do molecular testing at the primary level, completely independent of a laboratory.
And that for our viewers, basically molecular testing, I think the one we are all familiar with is the RT-PCR test done for COVID. It can be used for many other diseases, including TB.
Today we can do about 40 different kinds of diseases already on the platform, including cancer, like cervical cancer, for example.
But I think you've picked up on an important part, which is the headline of our discussion, which is innovation in manufacturing. Kartikey, I mean, how would you address it? How would you define innovation in manufacturing in today's context for your company?
See, so what you have done is when it comes to the manufacturing of our let's say EV chargers through our product partners, innovation was driven on two aspects. One was in the methods, that is the manufacturing methods. The second part was the deployment. Yeah. So for example, the charging stations are unmanned in nature. So they are driven through our cloud platform, which is now called Charge Cloud. So unlike a petrol pump attendant, you actually can sell. It's a self-service driven model for EV charging of your car. Similarly, on the back end, on the OEM manufacturing part, each of the charging stations, for example, are monitored by our OEM partner. So after the delivery of the product, you got to get into the annual maintenance, warranties and support. Again, you connect the same equipment to the cloud on the back end, which means that you can remotely maintain it, diagnose the fault if they occur, and if possible, even repair it remotely. So there has been a massive technological intervention in terms of not only manufacturing, but also service and support. But there's like something I want to add. See, as a country, as a manufacturing industry, I think there's something which is lacking is our ability to scale up, our ability to think bigger and scale up. And that's what China has scored higher. Yeah. Because
in fact, let me ask Yogesh to respond to this. This has been a refrain, if I may say so, not recently, but for many, many years.
Yeah, but I think you also have to keep in mind in China, a lot of the development was state directed, right? You know, the mayor of a city decides he needs a plant to make something, the local city bank gives them a big loan, and see what is happening in China today as a result of that. They are sitting on a massive, massive banking crisis. In India, a lot of the investment in manufacturing has been private sector led, right? And as a private sector, any private sector entrepreneur, you know, you have to be much more thoughtful about risk versus reward, access to capital, you know, so on and so forth. So I think China is, in my opinion, whilst they have developed very, very fast, I think a lot of their mistakes they have made are now seem to be catching up to them. I think we've been more thoughtful, yes, and I think the paradigm about scale is also changing in India earlier. You know, I think earlier in India it was hard to think on large scale, but today for a lot of products, like again I go back to my industry, the single biggest or the top 3 off-highway tire plants in the world are today in India by scale, right? So I think that it is changing. You know, again I would think that the Chinese model is not going to be the right model for us to copy because of a lot of it was state directed and a lot of that investment is frankly not really fruitful, which led to overcapacity in sector after sector.
In fact, a very important point, you know, a lot of China's growth is state directed, and we have to come back to China because that's where all the comparisons are. But you brought up an important point. I mean, off-road tires, India has some of the best capabilities. Adrish, let me come to you here because you were talking a lot about government policies. India is clearly following a different model, but how much of a key enabler does government policy need to be in order to really give us that kind of push?
Yeah, I think it started probably a few years back. I think starting with, let's say, the GST reforms, reform in the tax rates for corporates, and you have these policies which, you know, FAME and you know, PLI schemes and stuff like that.
I mean, it may be said that the EV market, for instance, is doing well because of FAME, right? I mean, a lot of the EV policies have been framed in such a way. Yes, Kartikey.
Yeah, I'd like to add to this what Adrish said. See, the job of government is governance, the policy making and the framework. It is the job of the industry, entrepreneurs and others, you know, to scale it up, you know, whatever they're doing, right? The business expansion, the CapEx, new product launches, innovation and so on. So if you really see, if you go out of India, now when you talk about a scale, is also about exports. So probably we need to touch that. One of the growth drivers will be India as an export base, not only of IT services, just like Vikas mentioned about e-services to e-manufacturing, but it's also about to explore the new markets. Now that is only possible by, let's say, quality, innovation, product pricing, government soaps, which was available in neighboring countries, which was probably not as much available within us. But certain critical reforms that has happened. GST, it gave away the octroys and the long queues of trucks outside the city, and so many things have transformed over the last 5 to 6 years.
So you're saying government has done a lot.
Has done already a lot. Now it's up to our industry to do it, to do more of
Absolutely.
it now.
But Vishal, you've already been operating, and so have you, Yogesh, and had experience of going and selling your wares globally across markets and set up manufacturing plants. What do you think it is when you talk about innovation and really being able to scale and overcome some of those obstacles? What do you think you did right?
I think a couple of things that we did was we went out and we acquired a few businesses which had a lot of good technologies and patents. We are now taking advantage of that. The Indian environment was not so conducive to be able to absorb that. But last 5 years, it's really looking good. And so we've started bringing those technologies to India for the manufacturing. And we see a huge growth taking place.
So you are now importing some of those technologies into your domestic plants here.
So India is the parent company owning those technologies, which were good for them then and were not good enough for India to scale. But now India is presenting the opportunity to scale, as Kartikey just mentioned. Now it is up to us, how do we scale it?
Okay. And what do you predict to be the future trend in terms of, is scale going to be a clear sort of demarcator, or what will really help us make that next move?
I think that's clearly the trend. If you see from the government perspective, they have pushed so much of the manufacturing so that while we are trying to grow the nation, we don't grow inflation too much. So clearly, I think the push is towards growing the manufacturing, growing the supplies, and not have supply constraints dictating your inflation.
There is also, India is inherently a market where there's a lot of small and medium enterprises.
Exactly.
I think it's not about few big companies doing scale. So I think it's an important facet of this particular domestic market, which I think we can't ignore. I think the SMEs and the medium-sized enterprises have a massive role to play in increasing that.
Just to add here, if we see, India has also been a lab of experimentation. Yeah, a 1 rupee coffee sachet was first introduced in India. Now it's also present in, let's say, Africa, for example. Yeah, so many global FMCG innovated in India. They made the Indian market as an experiment, but the domestic market itself is offering a massive scale. So when I talk about scale, is you already have a domestic market, your presence locally over here, which helps you to innovate, test, experiment, and scale up, and then you replicate in different economies or different countries as well. Okay. Now talking about automobile was once upon a time a disruptor, 100 years ago. Now it is getting disrupted. Now it is disrupted in a way that today as a market or as a, let's say, as an industry member or as a company, I am on probably a practically level playing field to my counterparts in Europe and US. The reason being, because an EV is made up of a chassis, motor, a battery, power controller, power electronics, something that I already understand. 100 years ago, there was a diesel technology, which I never knew. I was not independent as a country.
So akin to what, perhaps what Vishal is saying, now that technology is available with us as well.
Absolutely.
So I want to add to that. We are at an advantage for them, like for example, in the power sector. They need to dismantle their power sector and create a new one for the green power. We are building our power sector. We are starting from a base which we do not have to disrupt and do something. So in fact, we are at a much advantageous position currently compared to our Western counterparts.
In fact, let's talk a little bit about sustainability. And Shriram, let me bring you in here, because again, sustainability is a big buzzword when we talk about the future of manufacturing globally. And it's now becoming a big part of the whole ESG sort of framework as well. But you've always had your eye on that, right?
So, I mean, you have to be sustainable from every point of view, right? And now the regulatory systems are changing, so you have to adapt to the changing situations. But then, we're all talking about the domestic market. Yes, definitely it's a growing market and the opportunities are growing dramatically.
So actually, you did akin to what I think what Kartikey said. You grew your market in India, and then you've gone overseas.
Exactly.
Right?
So now we have to keep in mind the global markets. So they're also now open to us. And as was said earlier, India is now, discussed as a good.
So when you're talking about sustainability, I mean, what were some of those things internally? How do you define sustainability internally as a company, while also remaining economically viable?
Exactly. It's all about trying to keep your costs as low as possible and operate at the maximum efficiency. So it's a mixture of things you adopt in terms of power consumption, saving power, using renewable sources of energy, ensuring your staff are all being properly taken care of medically as well as in the ecosystem, and ensuring that you improve your efficiency. So we talked about efficiency earlier. So while there is a lack of skill still as an issue, but training and taking this kind of ESG approach helps quite a bit in improving your overall efficiency of the organization. And that makes you much more cost effective in terms of when you go to the global markets, you can leverage on that advantage that you already have.
Because let's bring up that theme of sustainability. Yogesh, it's a big thing. It's almost it's a hype. I mean, everyone's talking about it. But what does it actually mean in terms of business? Is it just a tick in the CSR box?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I would call it hype, right? I think today, it's very important for every business, to be profitable, but also to do good. And what's interesting today is you can actually one feeds into the other, so at our tire plant, for example, 60% of the power we buy is renewable, and we'd love to buy 100%, but current regulations cap us at 60%. But not only are we using green energy, but it's actually delivering our bottom line because it's cheaper than the grid power, right? So I think today you can actually enhance your profit and do good both at the same time, and I think every sound business is going to look at this very, very seriously, right? I'll give you another small example. When we were building our factory, so International Finance Corporation is a shareholder in our company, and they requested us, look, we have this green building certification called EDGE, would you consider using it? And we were a little nervous at first that if we will go down this path, it may increase the cost of construction and so on and so forth. But as we delved deeper into it, we realized that it was actually going to help us save cost. Like one of the suggestions they gave us is used aerated autoclave concrete bricks instead of red bricks, because red brick production is one of the key contributor to the ozone layer. And when our team did further research, we found that it was actually cheaper for us to use these AAC blocks versus using red bricks. So, there are, I think that any progressive business will find that you can actually, do good for the environment and for your bottom line at the same time.
That's a great point, because I think sustainability, perhaps investments in that area are seen more of a cost, or perhaps demands made by your by your customers.
I would echo Yogesh's point, right? I think most entrepreneurs that we see, it's the investment in sustainability is not driven by the fact that they need to tick the box. It's more driven by what makes sense for the businesses. I mean, I think most industries or entrepreneurs realize that subsidies can go and take them up to a certain point, right? It's not going to be sustainable. I mean, no industry has survived long based on just subsidies. Eventually, it has to make money on its own.
I mean, if I can bring in the EV industry, you were sort of corseted with a lot of a lot of stops from the government, which are eventually being withdrawn, have been withdrawn. So how do you respond to that, the whole sustainability aspect?
Yeah, so the sustainable. Okay, so I think this can be addressed in two parts. Obviously, the government soaps or incentives are a kickstarter for a new age industry, for example. But it's also very clear that it can't survive on soaps. For example, EV charging business that we built as Charge+Zone, we took ₹0 so far in form of soaps from government. We believe that the open market economics is the way forward, and that's how we started working on expanding our EV charging manufacturing and expanding our EV charging network pan-India for four-wheelers. Now, even four-wheelers are not, by the way, have no soaps. Cars are without subsidy, buses, etc. Yeah. So industry slowly has come to a phase that it can go ahead with a market economics. Now, coming to the sustainability part, I think a broader term can be now ESG. Certainly, it is not a tick off for CSR, absolutely no. We see there are several examples about ESG adoption. It's not about sustainability, but also governance. And as a matter of fact, in our journey, our compliances to ESG attracted more capital, because we are capex driven as well, yeah, and more capital is required for every stage of expansion. We found ESG compliance as a major driver, yeah, which was not as a correct, as a method of correction.
And that brought in a lot of international investors.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we had a successful round, a few quarters ago. There is another one coming up, but we discovered that it was not only for our inherent thing or our love for environment, sustainability, proper governance and processes within the organization, but also at the end of the day, for scalability. It's not about innovation and market, but also access to a competitive capital, and that is where ESG helped us, to tick off one of the several boxes that we had.
Okay, I'm never going to say tick in the box for CSR. I think you've all driven home the message.
But I'll tell you on this, on the other side, we have our group has over 250 patents, and all our scientists, doctorates, all their whole success was driven by how many patents you're filing and how do you take it to the market. And last 10 years was a lot of drive towards sustainability, carbon footprint, water reduction, all those kind of things. We have roughly about 20 patents filed in that area, and what we saw was that they did not move unless and until it was economically viable. So before filing any patents now, we have a rule to be vetted by the controller that is it going to be a viable product or not in a competing environment. Because if it's not, you can say as much as you want, it's not going to be sustainable. What this has done in the last 1 year, we are really having the scientists think about how do I make it economically viable and just not sustainable.
And that's a dream, right, for scientists, because they're always in...
But that's starting to happen, because earlier you were thinking either or.
And Sriram, you're nodding your head. You are a scientist in some sense. I mean, you have a biochemistry background.
Yes, absolutely. So this ecosystem is changing, right? Ecosystem is changing. Yeah, so that's what's the driver now. So people are thinking differently. People are thinking about solutions and how to ensure that you are still environment friendly and sustainable, right? That's the key.
And that's what we want. I mean, I think when we're talking about innovation and manufacturing the future, so to speak, and what's fascinating to me is during this entire discussion, typically in the past when we talk about the future, we always are talking either about generative AI, AI, ML, and how that's, a solid data strategy. You did mention going to the cloud. There's not been a lot of talk about technology in a sense. It's a very broad term. But when we talk about the future, and here, let me start with your vision, sort of, so to speak. Kartikey, when we talk about the future, I mean, what would be those key building blocks? Is technology going to be the central pillar for you? Or is it going to be equally distributed amongst many facets now, going from here?
Yeah, going from this point onwards, yes, technology is going to play a role, right? But at the same time, we need to be clear that what really or how the technology plays a role within my organization or within my industry as well. Now, when we talk about manufacturing per se, we have been speaking about innovation, we have been speaking about scale, but there's something called efficiency. Efficiency in terms of throughput, efficiency in terms of my input cost, and so on. Now, just to give an example, so when we speak about Industry 5.0, it's all about connected devices. Yeah. Now, this connected devices is my every equipment onto my shop floor is connected to my internal cloud. So I have just like a network administrator, there is an energy administrator, there is an equipment administrator who monitors the performance of each and every equipment. And now earlier it was all driven by a pen and paper, where there were readings being taken manually, the downtime, uptime, and so on. But IoT simply makes it so efficient, because now my entire equipment is connected to the cloud, where exactly I have all the performance parameters on board. There's one part. The second part, it helps in several things. For example, the preventive maintenance, the maintenance that you take up before the event occurs, right? So again, IoT helps tremendously in terms of determining the preventive maintenance of each and every equipment onto.
So your investment of future thrust is going to be on investing in these key technologies which improve efficiency. Would that be correct?
Yeah, correct. That's right. So one way to look at this, adopt technology with a goal in mind. Yeah, let's say efficiency, or let's say cost saving, or energy saving, whatever could be your goalpost. But the set of technologies are available, and they are cheaper than they were. They are let's say 100 times less cheaper, or 100 times 100th of the cost that, let's say, it was 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And that's the beauty of adoption of technology to a scale.
I think you've explained it so well that keep that goalpost in mind, and technology is getting only cheaper. Shriram, what's going to be that key goalpost for you as you manufacture for the future?
Now, for us, technology is not only for improving efficiency, but also for our own core business itself, right? So we are now talking about AI, ML interventions to interpret data, interpret results. So what a technician does can be done by an AI tool. So if you see under a microscope to look for something in a slide, today AI can automatically take that image, analyze it, and give a report better than even a technician could do. Now, that's the beauty of the whole thing. So the overall quality of delivery of value in diagnostics is changing completely, and AI ML is playing a very big role. It's not that we're going to replace all technicians. It's just that it's going to help them better in ensuring that the reports are even more.
So improve in quality, use technology, that's going to be your focus, to improve in quality and reduce error.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely.
Human error.
Yes, absolutely.
Cobots.
Cobots, oh right, that's a new term I've learned. Yes, Vishal, coming to you.
So we go with cobots. Instead of saying robots will do the job or humans will do the job, let's have a combination of that and call it cobots, which will drive the efficiency and will ensure the jobs remain there. Both will coexist. Robots are not going to take place without the humans.
Let's talk about your company in particular. I mean, you've already sort of established your global footprint. What's going to be your key innovation for the future?
This factory which we are putting up for fiberglass in India, Chinese control 70% of the global capacity. So it's literally enter the dragon kind of a situation for us.
In your case,
In
enter the
in India,
enter the tiger.
fighting with a dragon, you know.
Yeah.
So the only way we visited one of their factories and we saw the amount of mechanization, not automation. So how do you term the word mechanization and not automation? I would call it cobots, where you had these things being driven by humans, but had a lot of mechanization in them, increasing their efficiency. Today we have a lot of people working in India, humans, without that mechanization being available. Combine that, and today our factory in Goa for the fiberglass will be one of the most modern, and to add capacity per kiloton will be amongst the lowest in the world.
Right. So the unit economics is really
Absolutely,
something
and
that
it's
can
not
be
about
driven by
automation,
technology.
it's more about mechanization.
Right. So cobots or
Cobots.
mechanization.
We've introduced at various places cobots.
Very interesting. So that's an eye on the future. Yogesh, I kept your view for the last because you began in the industry and you caught the eye of global players. Today you're crafting your own story, working with a lot of global partners and players as well. What's your sort of forecast for the future?
So look, I think digitalization, use of technology in manufacturing, whether it is the IoT as Kartikey spoke about, or whether it's mechanization as Vishal spoke about, I think all these things are really very, very essential to be future ready for Indian manufacturing, and I think all the progressive manufacturers in India are in their own way addressing this.
What are you investing in?
I think these being sort of the base, I think another very interesting trend that we're looking at, and which is again very relevant for the tire sector, but I would believe for many other sectors, is the other element of sustainability, about the raw material. In our industry, we've seen Michelin say we'll be using, or practically every industry leader said by 2050 we'll be using 100% sustainable raw material. Now, if you look at it, that so much of our raw material value chain today comes from the petrochemical stream, that'll be a very interesting area that we are very excited about. We are working towards. We see a lot of opportunity there to, both, do good, but also possibly get some advantages and efficiencies in our cost structures and other things. So I think that is also one important element, about as we think to the future, that in our industry is very relevant, but I'm certain it applies to various other industries, is in addition to using, all the new technologies coming up, how do we leverage this to sort of use more sustainable raw materials?
Right.
And
Is the word called provenance? I think is that what it's called? No,
No.
I think it's a French word.
Yeah.
Okay. So essentially tracing the sustainability of raw materials and using sustainable raw materials.
And using a more and more higher mix of recycled or reclaimed or whatever you want to call it material within your product. I think that is something that I see a lot of, I'm personally very excited about, and where I see the opportunity.
You've always been a trend spotter, and I'm sure that's something that will really evince a lot of interest in all our viewers. Final word to you, Adrish, since you're sort of looking at the macro, the big picture. So pull out the zoom, we are pulling out the zoom now. Give us the big picture about, what you think, where India is headed. To borrow Yogesh's words, we don't need to follow the China path, right? We are crafting our own path. From here on, what are those key aspects that foreign investors or the world is watching that India needs to do right in order to innovate and manufacture for the future?
So I think, Indian entrepreneurs have always been, I think having that mindset, right, about innovation. Somebody mentioned about, the scale was always the issue. Now, whether we need to replicate what China did, maybe not. I mean, we can have our own model in terms of how we are able to scale up. In technology, all of that, I think, is more of a business decision rather than, just a fancy that I need to, improvise my processes based on technology. It's probably a compelling thing for making sure that your business are more efficient and profitable. I think that's a trend we are seeing across all industries. And in all of this, I think, ensuring that the skills, so even you mentioned about cobot, I mean, the person who are still in the factory, their skill needs to be also upgraded, right, to be able to. So I'm sure skill development is also another area which, we see a lot of clients investing into, because they feel that could be a big gap in trying to achieve, the manufacturing sector outcomes that we are looking at.
But the future is looking tremendously excited. I've learned so many new things, and looking at your confidence and really your optimism about where India is headed, looking at all the tools which are available domestically, globally, and of course with support from the government as well. I think there is no looking back, and manufacturing will continue to play a pivotal role and continue to claim those innovation awards and really move ahead and chart its own course, which is something that India has always done, especially entrepreneurial India. That's always been the story. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us and for really sharing those wonderful and very valuable insights. We hope you've enjoyed it as well. Thank you for watching.
Forbes India presents India's growth drivers in partnership with Barclays Private Clients.